This is Mike Croissant, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Yes, you are. We are live from Big Z's Pizza House and Brew, which is in Katy, Texas. Fantastic hosts. If you like Chicago-style pizza, if you like beefs, man, these guys have, it's incredible. They're great hosts, and I thank them for setting it up. Thank Mike for setting up and doing all the work to get us going. I am on the way back from Save the Brave, Ride for the Brave 2022. I've got Scott's truck. Actually, we can't quite see, but just up over my back is the truck with the motorcycle in it. And so I'm making my way back. I'm in Houston now. I'll be in Dallas tonight. I'll be in Terlingua area out in the middle of nowhere, Texas. And then I'll be in El Paso and in Tucson and then finally home after about 14 days on the road. So I appreciate you guys all checking it out. That's why I've been so quiet. We'll get the pace of the shows going back up again here soon. This is just first of several the next couple of days. Some really interesting things that are coming up. So, hey, everybody, thanks for checking out the Break It Down show. Now, the thing I want to get into with Mike is we'll briefly talk about his book. He wrote about his uncle in World War II, and the book is called Bombing Hitler's Hometown. And then the other thing I want to get into is he worked in the CIA, by the way. Big reveal. Mike worked in the CIA, and we both worked. You can't see your hair. Point to your hat and show him. Yeah, look at that. He's even got a hat. It's legit. And so we both work in Asia, and so we're going to talk about some of that stuff and just give you some of that spy versus spy stuff that we do here when we talk about the ins and outs of the job and what we do and everything. So really, Mike, if you would really briefly talk a little bit about your book, about your uncle, and then let's dive back into the CIA stuff.
Sure. Welcome back to Houston. It's good to see you again. You passed through last week, and we got to finally meet and enjoy a cold one together and mark a great cause, the Ride for the Brave. Really appreciate all you've done for our brothers and sisters in uniform. So thank you and welcome back. I hope you brought rain back with you. Last week you brought some rain, which we sorely need. So thank you for that, and hopefully it'll follow you again. Again, my name is Mike Croissant. I retired from the CIA last year. However, the decade before that, I started writing a book about World War II tentatively called Bombing Hitler's Hometown. It's essentially the untold story of the last mass bomber raid of World War II in Europe. It was a strike by the 15th Air Force against a rail target in the city of Linz, Austria. And Linz, Austria just happens to be the town that Adolf Hitler claimed as his hometown. He spent about nine of his first 18 years there, and some fairly significant things happened to him that may have started him on the course that he would later lead in life. The raid happened at the very end of the war, April 25th, 1945. It was very interesting to us. We lost about 25 men, 14 bombers, Marco as a participant, as well as about 5,000 other young Americans. The story is incredible. It's about the mission and the aftermath. Given that so many bombers were shot down, I traced through veterans' interviews, letters that they wrote home, and other previously untapped sources, the journey they took to get back into Allied hands. Some were captured by Germans, some by Austrians, some by the Soviets. And each crew got into adventures of some kind, be it captivity or hijinks with the Russians. One unfortunate American named Dale Shabelsky turned himself over to the Soviets and was tortured as a suspected German spy. So all of these stories are woven into a narrative that I think is very gripping. It's a story of survival. And young men, 18, 19, 20 years old, just trying to make it to the end of the war. And then after the war, trying to come to terms with what they did. So that's what the book is about. And I've recently hired an agent, and hopefully we'll be getting a publishing deal in the near future.
I'm working on the sound while we're talking here. It's not going as good as I want it to, so I'm going to keep working on trying to fix that while we talk. But I thought we might now dive into I'm loud. Okay, we're getting there.
The thing I wanted to get into now is the CIA part of your career. You had this incredible career working in Central Asia, and I thought we might take some time to explore what that is and just talk about what countries you worked in and the kind of work you might do.
Sure. When I was little, I wanted to be an astronaut. First, I wanted to be a firefighter and then an astronaut. And I think my first introduction to Central Asia was, the Soviet launch facility at Baikonur in what is now Kazakhstan. But moving forward in time a bit, the Soviet Union broke up when I was a junior in college, I believe. And literally overnight, where there was once one country, the Soviet Union, there were now 12. And 5 of those countries inhabited what we know as the geographical area of Central Asia. We have Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. And in those heady days of the fall of the Soviet Union and the supposed victory of the West over communism, there was a lot of talk about these new countries and with a very exotic. They had a very exotic feeling, being an area of the world that not many people knew about at that time. There was ethnic conflict breaking out already. Civil war in Tajikistan broke out in the early 90s. There was ethnic fighting between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz, and there was talk of a new competition between Iran and Turkey and Russia and even the United States for influence in these countries. And it was just fascinating to me as a college person trying to figure out my way in life. I went on, graduated from the University of Illinois and entered into eventually a master's program at Indiana University where you could actually specialize in history, culture, and languages of that area. And I was pretty hooked at this point, and I did it. I got a master's. I learned to speak Uzbek. I learned about how Islam is practiced in that region, and I learned the politics and economics and culture. And very, very luckily for me, the CIA came recruiting my last month or two at Indiana. And by that time, I was also studying Azerbaijani, with Azerbaijan not being Central Asia, but being close. And I was absolutely hooked on the region. And CIA agreed, and they took me on. And I started in December 1999 as a political analyst covering one of the Central Asian countries. A political analyst is what it sounds like. You're a CIA analyst using all forms of information, open sources, human intelligence collected from what you might know as spies, signals intelligence, which would be communications intercepts, imagery taken from satellites or whatnot, putting it all together to keep American policymakers informed about what's going on in the region. Are there any strategic threats that may emanate from there? What are the political and economic trends, etc.? And it was a lot of fun, and I learned very quickly that it's also challenging because this is a part of the world that's, even to this day, still pretty reclusive. The political systems, in particular, the leaders, especially at the time when I joined in 1999, were very much focused on maintaining political control above all else. So not a lot of information got out. It wasn't independent. The independent Central Asia situation was not a lot different from the situation during the Soviet Union. So analysis I have likened it to putting a puzzle piece together when you don't have all the pieces. It's very challenging, and for a region, you might think that the CIA has unlimited resources and is an all-seeing, all-knowing organization, and I assure you that's not the case. The amount of information is directly related to how much resources are thrown at a problem. So when I first started in 1999, Central Asia was not a high priority for the United States, and the amount of collection that we received showed that. So, we did our best with the information we had, but it often wasn't enough. So I think that was a very long answer to your question, but
you've done complex stuff, so it's important to kind of lay down the groundwork. There's a lot of questions within that, but let's talk about the stands in general in Central Asia. And it's important that we talk about Asians and we don't think about all of the, 70 or so countries that are in Asia, from Timor-Leste to Israel, and Palestine, which is not even a country to us, so there's a lot to cover, and a lot of, it's quite a bit of cultural knowledge, and not just inter-country, but also intra-country dynamic that takes years and years and years to master. And it's tough when you're in an office and you can't even go out enough to understand that there are Turkmenistan people. I mean, all these different Turk-based things. You're like, how in the world do you keep it all? And then some guy from Turkmenistan falls in love with some lady from Kyrgyzstan, and they have, several generations of kids, and you're trying to put all this together. How do you, and they're reclusive. How do you wrestle with all of that complexity and required contextual knowledge to be a good analyst, to think of good questions? And then you have to have someone who can go on the ground and provide you with information that you need so you can better work the puzzle, because you're working a bunch of puzzles and there's no box to look at the lid.
Right. It's undoubtedly challenging. The typical CIA job is 2 years. You're expected after 2 years to move on and do something new, maybe 3 at the outset. And it's not easy to develop expertise in 2 years, especially for a complicated region like you've described. So you just, I was fortunate coming in with a baseline of knowledge, and I don't and never have claimed to be an expert. To me, an expert is something way beyond what I achieved, but it helps to know some of the language if you can. Definitely learn the culture as much as possible, and study the political system. It's hard, and right away for me, I started in December 1999, so I had a little bit of time to cut my teeth, and then September 9th, 2001, we got the news that Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed in Afghanistan. He was the leader of the main resistance to the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we knew, my team knew that would have an impact on Central Asia. So that Monday, September 10th, I remember distinctly coming into work and learning about his death, and just collectively trying to figure out what it would mean, with the Taliban finally, presumably soon, taking control of the rest of Afghanistan. I should probably take a step back and note, if you don't have immediate access to a map right now, it's okay. Think of Central Asia as the area. Russia is to the north. To the east is Mongolia and China. To the south is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, and Iran. And to the west is Eastern Europe. So it is very much central. It's right smack in between all of these major powers, and something I didn't really grasp fully for a while was that historically these countries had never really been the master of their own destiny. They have always been part of someone else's empire. You can go all the way back to Alexander the Great, who came through the southern part of Central Asia, and third century BC or so, right up through the Mongol conquest and the eventual Russian conquest of the region. The area has always been controlled by somebody else. Then all of a sudden, 1991, 92, boom, you have 5 new countries finally able to have their own governments and to an extent control their own destiny. So I got into it a few years into their independence, and by that time they were already sort of going down separate paths. Tajikistan had a civil war, a brutal civil war that ended in 1997, and Kazakhstan went down the path of exploiting its formidable energy reserves, and Turkmenistan had a leader who, the dictionary definition of a cult of personality, it was him, Sapar Murat Niyazov, this guy. There was a golden statue of him in the Capitol, and it would rotate, so the sun would always be shining upon his face. Not kidding. I think he changed the names of the months to, family members' names or something. It was crazy. It was just a really extremely interesting place, and the way to get up to speed on it and be a good analyst is just putting your nose to the grindstone and approaching it with a lot of humility, knowing that there are things that you will never really truly understand, but just doing your best. And travel really helped. I grew up in a small town in central Illinois where it was a big deal just to go to Chicago, and Chicago was 90 minutes away. It was a big deal to do that. So when I suddenly, a few months into my CIA tenure, I'm being told that I'm going to all these countries, I got bit by the travel bug very early on. I loved it. I learned so much, and it's the thing that will probably miss most, other than working with the people, is the travel. And I would go for weeks and weeks at a time and travel to all 4 corners of some of these countries and meet interesting people and see how they worshiped, see how they dealt with everyday problems, and how they thought about the world and how they thought about America. It was a great experience for a small town guy, and I think it made me a better analyst.
That exposure to religion, we often diminish the role of religion because here in the States we have a freedom either from or of religion, depending on how you look at it. And the fact is that in most of the rest of the world, that's not the case. It's a major. I mean, I always like to say, we want to separate church and state, but the word Islamic was in the title of the Afghan government, and the words Allah Akbar are written on the Iraq flag. We want to separate these things, but really it is a form of governance out there. So I want to ask you, I bet folks want to know, what is it like to travel to these various stands? And then are you traveling under a cover? Does the CIA be like, hey, go get lost for a couple of weeks and come back? We're paying for you to learn. How does all of that work? And talk about religion after that.
I'll probably pass on that question. I will say that everything I did was above board, and that I would go to the American embassy and made up with a embassy officer who had responsibility for human rights or religion, and travel around with them, and nothing in the light of day and learning. The second question on religion, you're right in that Islam is a part of their identity, but what that actually means is something I never really figured out. It's hard to describe. It's not in the vast majority of Central Asia, Islam is not practiced as a go to the mosque and pray 5 times a day kind of a religion, and practice the 5 pillars of Islam. people do that, but it's more of the identity. I don't know how to quantify it, but part of who they are dictates a lot of how they live their life. But the external part of it, going to mosque 5 times a day or whatnot, is much less.
Right.
And that in part is due to the governments and being former Soviet governments, Soviet successor states, very suspicious of religion. And that continued into the post-Soviet period. Anything that the government could not directly control, they were suspicious of, and Islam was preeminent among those. In Tajikistan during the Civil War, there was an Islamic component to that, among many other things. It was a very complicated situation, but overall, there is not a country in that region that allowed people to worship openly. And I think in very large measure, that created a lot of the problems they would later face with Islamic radicalism and terrorism. The repression only made people push back more, when just allowing religious freedom could have solved so many problems before they started.
When you look at a people, right, we tend to categorize them into one giant group, right? The South is backwards. California is full of a bunch of communists, all these things, right? But in reality, if you go to fill in the blank stand, Turkmenistan, there are a lot of variety of people with a lot of variety of problems, and the vast majority of them, and you're a counterterrorism guy, I am too, right? I know that the vast majority of the people in whatever the blank country or county, wherever you want to look, they're not those people. I just spent the last, I don't know, whatever it is, 12 days, I think, traveling around the nation. I've not met a terrorist. I've not met a Nazi. I've met people that are wonderful, warm people who've opened their hearts up to my cause, or just showed up because they know it's my cause and they love me. I mean, that's what I've experienced. You must have seen the same thing. How you, as an analyst, how do you assess? Let me tell a story. So I was going to go on an assignment, and I was going to do some work for Intel Community, and we had a pre-travel threat brief. And the guy who comes in, he's an analyst, right? And he's like, oh my God. And we are traveling within the United States. And we are looking at people from a portion of Asia that is on the eastern end of Asia. And he comes in and he's like, radical Islamists in Europe. Like, well, okay, great. But we're so threat focused, it seems like we lose the plot that most of these people are trying to scratch out of existence. They're all trying to fight for the same things. Yes, we're looking for these 100,000, however many people it is, not that many. How do you balance that when you're doing analysis work? Or does that matter to you? Like, are you really just focused on these 1,000? I mean, if it's 1,000 people, that's a lot. And in most places, it's like we just killed. Well, it's very few people that cause all the problems.
It really is. And the way I solved it, I didn't solve it. I don't think anyone could solve it. Let me rephrase that. The way I tried to do my analysis was to get out there and see things with my own 2 eyes, and talk to thought leaders in the Islamic community, and talk to everyday Muslims and everyday people to learn, what their concerns were, learn what Islam meant to them. And I learned so much doing that. And again, this was all in the light of day, nothing clandestine. I learned that Islam is a great and beautiful tapestry in Central Asia, as it is everywhere. But in Central Asia, it has its own, wrinkles. There's a heavy influence of Sufism, of Sufi rituals, which is a sort of mysticism. There's a heavy emphasis on worshiping at shrines. It's not the mosque-centric form of Islam that you would find elsewhere. Very varied within country, and very, 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 extremely varied across the region. So in my travels, talking to normal people and visiting mosques and talking with mullahs and such, I became a much better American, but also a much better analyst. And when the questions would inevitably come from the policymakers after 9/11, do we need to worry about Islamic radicalism in Central Asia becoming a threat? I could answer it with more than just a book answer or from reading something. I could answer it from the perspective of what I saw, and that's irreplaceable. And being able to do that, and also just the interactions with people. It's such an exotic place for a guy from small town Illinois to have a chance to go out and just one-on-one, human being to human being, and talk to these people, other believers, and learn their concerns and their different beliefs. It was something I'll treasure for the rest of my life.
When you look at our perceptions of America, there's two angles I want to ask this. One, what do people that you encounter in Central Asia, what do they think of the United States? And then two, when we hear this this narrative that we are filled with a bunch of, like, our biggest threat is internal domestic terror, do you think that is as true and as inflammatory as they make that sound? I mean, it's a prime news story, I don't know, every other week or something like that. Or is that overblown too? Because again, the number of people that are really a problem, from my experience, is very small. Now, they're a big problem, but when they say things like it's domestic terrorism, I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, in Central Asia, the repression quickly drove those who were violent, for the most part, out. The Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, in particular, was one of the groups that I was following closely, and it was sort of a insurgent / terrorist group. It would do a little bit of terrorism, but was mostly an insurgent group seeking to overthrow the government of Uzbekistan. After bombings in February of 1999 that the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, the IMU, perpetrated, the crackdown was so hard that whatever footprint they had in Uzbekistan, they all left and went to Tajikistan and then later to Afghanistan. And there they allied eventually with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and we ended up fighting them for many, many years.
When you look at terrorism in general, and we do a crackdown, and these guys squirt out and go to the places, sometimes they squirt out and they come here in the United States, right? I would submit that they're less of a threat now. They're more in survival mode, trying to find whatever kind of under the radar job they can find within their community. But is there a better way to deal with these problems of these singular people or singular groups that cause such a ruckus externally?
It's so hard, and we deal with the question here of, red flag laws, and should we, prevent crimes before they happen, and should we be monitoring everyone? At what point should we report, our fellow citizens to the authorities if they demonstrate bad behavior or alarming behavior, rather? That's such a hard question. Obviously others don't have the civil liberties that we have as Americans. The typical response for most of the Central Asian countries was to lock up anybody who might have a whiff of extremism about them, or even being a little bit too devout. And you can't lock up thousands and thousands of people and expect things to go well. And you can't so tightly control the sphere of religion. And I'm speaking from the perspective of these governments, not ours. You can't restrict Islam in such a way that people have no way to breathe and engage in these rituals that have nothing at all to do with any anti-government activity at all. These are just life rituals: birth, death, circumcision. There are all different kinds of rituals in these countries that are tied to Islam. And I'm not saying that those were all squashed, but the sphere for practicing religion was greatly reduced, and that led to a lot of problems that didn't need to be. In one example, and I was rousted out of bed in the middle of the night a couple of times. I was an analyst, and one of them was in 2005 in Uzbekistan. There's an area of Uzbekistan to the east called the Fergana Valley. It's generally a more, I hate to say this, it's sort of too general, but more Islamically devout in general, just more traditional, where Islam is identified with more closely. Well, there was a group that clung to Islamic principles, but had nothing to do with politics, extremism, certainly not violence. But it involved businessmen, and these businessmen were employing people in the community, which the government was not doing. They paid well, they treated their people well, and that was typical. But because of their Islamic element, the government got nervous and put some of them on trial. Well, at one point in 2005, I believe it was after the trial had concluded unfavorably for the people, there was a mass demonstration in the square in Andijan. Andijan was the city, and very, very atypical for Uzbekistan. The Uzbeks are they're very quiet in the sense that they don't stand up to authoritarianism. Well, this time they did, and several thousand just average everyday people came out into the public square in Andijan. Let me back up a little bit. Supporters of this group that was keeping people employed took up arms and broke some people out of jail and started an uprising. They took over the government center, probably killed a lot of people, government people, and it was an uprising.
Yeah.
And the government, as any government in the world would, responded, sending in forces, and no one knows exactly what happened. I don't think. Maybe that's changed. I haven't really thought about it in many years, but at some point, someone opened fire on one side or the other, and the end result was lots of people, lots of innocent people, protesters being killed. So this was at a time when the United States was working very closely with Uzbekistan on counterterrorism. We had a military base in Uzbekistan that we were using in the campaign against Afghanistan, and clearly this caused quite a problem for the United States. Suddenly, we have a almost Tiananmen Square-like situation happening in one of our allies, in one of our allied countries. It led to a rupture in the relationship. I think over the course of 3 days, I got a total of 7 hours sleep, just trying to figure out what the heck had happened and keep the president and those close to him informed to the extent I could. Again, it was a question of not having enough intelligence collection to be able to say things like who shot first, what was really happening. but you have to do your best. You can't not answer. So over the course of a couple of days, I just did my best to try to tell the administration what happened. It was unfortunate, those people didn't need to die, but on the other end, it was an armed anti-government uprising. So it led to a rupture in the relationship, and we ended up closing our military base. So.
Yeah. Back to it is complex to do this kind of work. It's crazy, and sometimes we can be a little bit hard on ourselves and also overestimate our ability to control, prevent, or cause these things. I mean, a lot of ways, like we're just kind of along for the ride. And as you alluded to earlier, a lot of this is logistics and personnel, and you want to have enough experience in country X. But the fact is the analyst might be new, the boss might be bad, the guy who is going to go collect, and maybe he just had a baby, and you're like, there's nobody here,
Right.
And so it can be that way. And then you try to make your case for what needs to happen or what provisioning you need. And this goes back to the State Department in Benghazi. Everybody wants more security. On 9/11, everybody wants more. So it doesn't happen. There's not enough, right? The ODA that got hit out in Mali and the border out there, like that, it shouldn't be that they're left that open and exposed. But the reality is we often work open, exposed, and understaffed. Even though we have this massive CIA and this massive State Department, it's really not that many people.
No, it's really not.
Yeah.
And, you think that Uncle Sam sees all and hears all and is this all-powerful force, and that's not the case. A lot of situations I was in when I was like, I really wish I had some QRF backing me up for this, but
yeah. How impactful are we with our presence, with our efforts? I mean, do we cause more problems, do you think, in general? And I'm talking in general, right? Super broad, but do we cause more problems than we solve? Or is it the other way around? Or do you even have a sense for, like, how often are we actually causing the problem that we're trying to prevent from happening?
I don't want to stray into the political here.
Right.
I will say the State Department in particular has, its set of diplomatic objectives that it wants to accomplish in the country, and those are often reflected in us sort of advocating and preaching for things that don't go over so well in more conservative countries. I don't mean conservative like conservative versus liberal U.S., but just more, in an Islamic country, some of our social issues that some of the social issues that the United States goes over and advocates for are not welcome. And I think in that sense, at least diplomatically, we're not doing ourselves any favors. And I get it. We are the beacon of freedom in the world, and we're going to, represent our values. But we get into some unforced errors a lot in that respect.
Part of that work is putting yourself in a situation to figure out what you need to hopefully do the job well, and that does create unforced errors. But if you don't go, you also don't have the ability to do the right thing if you can, right? And so a little bit of grace goes to all these folks that go do these things. It is hard, and also new boss, new goals. That can be exasperating.
Yeah, it's really hard. Not only just the change of administration, but the constant change of jobs. I stuck around more than most. I did one of those Central Asian countries for 5 years, which is very atypical. I just stuck with it. I enjoyed it, and I did change after 5 years and did something slightly different, but slightly different spin on it. That's very atypical. Most people are change every 2 years. And when we're talking about war zone service, you're changing every 1 year, 2 years at the outside. So, in Afghanistan conflict that goes on for 20 years, that's almost 21-year wars in terms of the personnel that our people are sending in. And you do your best to learn what the person who came before you knew and soak up the institutional knowledge. But at some point, it just becomes impossible. And it feels like we're reinventing the wheel every 1 or 2 years. And that's no way to fight a generational war, as you well know. Did you ever go to Central Asia? Or?
Well, I mean, Afghanistan.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you want to call that Central Asia, I would. But yes, so if Afghanistan is Central Asia, and the reason why I say this, and you'll get this, like, what's the Middle East? Is Morocco in the Middle East? It's Afghanistan in the Middle East. Like, what's East? What's West? So it gets a little crazy. So, yeah, I've been there. And also Iraq, which is not Central Asia, but it's still Asia. It's still that 21 one-year wars. And then I always like to say it's worse than that because we have amnesia as to anything that happened before us or after us. We just think we came in and did a great job. And that causes this repetition of craziness that drives the locals nuts. Like, hey, we're going to work on this thing. Like, we're not even worried about that. And you're the fifth guy to introduce this idea. It never happens. And so we burn our credibility.
Right.
And it's terrible. And one of the things that made me special and good at my job was that I stayed in the region. I developed my own system. I knew how to deal with us to get us to do less and turn about and go in the right direction faster. And it wasn't because I decided that. It was unit after unit saying, oh my gosh, we're all going to go this way. And so I learned how to get them to turn faster, right? I never really got us going in the right direction because then they would leave so fast. But even like here I am, this well of knowledge, I'm sitting there, right? And I knew that when the old unit left, there'd be a gap when they just were shut down and they weren't going to do anything. And then after that, the new unit would come in and they wouldn't even talk to me. And so as if I didn't exist. So right there's like 12 weeks of just at best half speed work. And then you have all these, like, we could do so much if we had people that stayed, but in the CIA, in the Army, the State Department, you don't stay long enough to develop real mastery of it. So I got to stay, so I got to develop mastery. But even then, I had to develop trust with all of these external units, the CIA, dealt all these different people that are there. And then you start to move forward, and then it's like, oh, pieces start falling off the ship and going home and everything, right? So it's exasperating. Very, very to get this stuff. The thing I want to add, I'm going to get your thoughts on this, is so much of our modern conflicts are driven by personality, by interaction with people. And nobody is an expert in interaction with people. We just like, oh yeah, you just go out there and talk to the guy and you figure it out and try tribal dynamics and read a book. And that you can't survive and win that way. It's not good enough. It's not professional grade. You know, on the Army side, you learn how to work a weapon system or 3 or 4. You know everything about it, capability. But then we get the actual fight of people. We don't spend 2 weeks even on getting better at that.
Yeah, I think I would call that institutional amnesia, the thing you were talking about earlier, where you just
Thanks, Brad.
All the stuff the guy or lady before you knew is practically lost when you hand over the reins. I asked a assistant secretary of state once, you know, what I could do, what my office could do better for him. What did he most need to know? And he thought for about 2.5 seconds, and he said, how do these places actually work?
Yeah.
And as Americans, the whole idea of tribes and clans and tribal identity and what that means, what kind of baggage that brings on a person, it's completely opaque to us. Relationships and trust are absolutely critical, and it's really hard to develop that when you don't actually get at a deep level how the place works. And you know, at the country level, all the way down to the village level, there's so many different overlapping dynamics that it's practically impossible for an outsider to comprehend. But God bless you for giving it a college try. It sounds like
Yeah,
you did, and I'm sure you had success.
right. But that success was ethereal.
Yeah.
You know, you try to, and everybody wants to do the right thing, but we struggle at it, right? And I can write the report, but if 18 months later, there's not even knowledge of that report and how
Yeah.
important it was, and all the work, the months of work that go into getting this one thing right. God damn, it's really hard to win when you're refusing to even remember the lesson that's been offered.
Or even knowing what the lesson was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. If you could change one thing about the CIA, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but you know, I mean, look, you didn't stay in for forever and ever, right? There's things that made you go, I gotta go. If you just fix one thing, what would be one thing you fixed?
I would. It's so hard, you know, to be deployed, because not every post you can take your family. And
Right.
I did a post with my family, and I did a war zone assignment without my family. And I've known men and women who bounce from one war zone to another, leaving their family behind, not seeing them for more than a few weeks at a time for years and years. I wish there was a way where we could persuade more people to invest in the deep learning of language and culture, and committing to living in those communities 4 years at a time, not just the 2 years and change or 1 year and change.
Yeah.
I think we would be better as CIA officers, and we would be safer as a country, not just in our ability to understand, you know, our friends and our enemies, but them being able to understand us better and knowing better what to expect of us.
I know in my job, when they send you somewhere, you can often be the first person there. Sure, maybe there's some element, they don't have enough capacity to go out where I'm at or whatever, right? And it's up to me. I mean, from earlier, like my degree in mass comm, it made me a reporter. It means like, hey, Pete, go find the stories, you know, go to City Hall, go to the barbershop. How do you do that? Your form of that. When you sit down somewhere and you're like, all right, how do we find some things out so I can start analyzing? What does that look like for you?
Early on, you know, I was only an analyst on paper I was for most of my career, but a bona fide country analyst for about 5 years. And at that point in the agency's history, there was a pretty sturdy wall between the analysts and the collectors. You know, from the collector's perspective, the analyst didn't need to know anything about the source of the information. You know, that could lead to compromises, the compromise of the asset and him being locked up or whatever, or worse. But from the analytical perspective, you could have a stack of reports this thick,
Mm-hmm.
and 90% of them could be from one source, 10% from 5 other sources, and you would never know. You would never be able to say, okay, well, this source is pretty consistent in what he or she is telling us. This guy's information is kind of sketchy. We couldn't do that because we weren't brought into the fuller circle of the scope of the assets, access to the information. That did change, fortunately. But by the time I had stopped doing analysis on a daily basis, I could not take advantage of that. And you know, I grew frustrated with analysis, and I needed to make a change. So I did go abroad with my family, like I said, and got to see, you know, the more full spectrum of what the intelligence community does, and
Mm-hmm.
what it takes to meet assets, and meeting with our counterparts in the local intelligence service, and that really changed me for the better, both as an American and as a CIA officer. Just being exposed to, how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
So, what for you? You were a collector. Did you interact with analysts, and did you think poorly of us, or not at all about us? Or
once I was matured, I didn't think poorly of the analyst, because in my specific line of work, there are the puzzle solvers, the analysts. There are the people who get operations and know how to put the right assets in certain. And that's not me. I can do these jobs, but it's not what I'm great at. Like someone who's great at operations, you're like, that guy is so they don't miss a beat. I'm like, yeah, I'll figure it out. And that guy already figured it out. And then there's the collector, like the person who's got the charm and the ability to do that. So yeah, you learn that the analysts are important, and then the information, in my case, the information always goes up, and I can't adjust I'll get a question, but the question's out of left field, and it's like, why would I know the answer to that? And I would communicate back up, and I would say, what do you mean, how many schools do we have here in this district? Why would I know that? And they're like, well, go ask the guy. And I'm like, well, who's asking the question? Oh, the captain. I'm like, well, I'm talking to his partner. Well, why doesn't he go ask his partner? That's not a question for me to ask. I'm supposed to ask things that no one else can get, right? So that part of the mechanism also often didn't work properly unless I engaged in an upward way to say, hey, what are you trying to sort out so I can help you? Because otherwise, I know what the information requirements are, but frankly, I don't care about those, because my job is to find out what you guys can't even know to ask about, really. And I'll answer the other things along the way, if that makes sense. So, but that took a long time to get there, to understand what the commander needed. And what the commander needed was, am I winning or losing today? Am I winning or losing today? That's how it was for me.
Yeah, when the wall between the analysts and the collectors started to come down, I think the collection side came to realize eventually that analysts, one, could be trusted with the more sensitive aspects of collection, but also that the analyst could help refine the collection. If an analyst is able to know, well, okay, you have a meeting with source X next week, and this person has access to bad guy number 2. Well, why don't you ask him these questions? And then collector was, okay, I'll do that. And once trust was built and a feedback loop developed, it became beneficial to all. And
it is funny how much we struggle to trust one another. Again, I'm from the outside. Even though I'm Department of Army wearing a uniform, I'm not in their unit. They don't trust me. If I go to see the CIA guy or the rule of law guy or the State Department, they don't have to do anything with me or for them. Oh, that's Pete. They might like me, but they don't trust me. And so I spent a lot of time trying to develop trust so that I could help them as well, because none of them had enough collectors. And the other problem that I experienced, I'm curious how this impacts you, but I always pick on the ag team. So the ag team would go out and be like, hey, we won the war today. And I was like, all right, let's find out. And I'd go back 2 days later, a week later, hey, what happened the other day when that group of guys
government
came
stole
out?
all the stuff.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, never mind that. That's garbage. So it made me a bit of a problem because I had a lot of bad news, but also it allowed me to cure the commander of the poison that they were being fed. It wasn't that I was trying to undermine anybody else. I'm just saying, well, you told me today that you won. I went over here a week later and I didn't find that win. As a commander, I'd want to know that. Does that kind of thing at all resonate with what you're doing? We're like, hey, we're told this, but it's a snapshot in time. What's the next snapshot?
No, I don't think so. In the countries I was covering, we didn't have that kind of situation. They weren't in a war, and we certainly weren't fighting there. So that was never a measurement that we had to deal with. Well, it's been a very emotional, day.
Yeah.
For me, and I want to say thank you to my brothers and sisters. We got the news yesterday. The world got the news yesterday that the leader of Al Qaeda was removed from the battlefield, as we say, in Kabul. Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed in a CIA strike. So congratulations to anyone watching who had any hand at all in that. I was with you for the hunt. I certainly understand the sacrifices that you all make on a daily basis to keep us safe at night. Thank you. And I also want to mention that another reason yesterday was so emotional was that Gary Schroen passed away. Gary Schroen was the legendary case officer who led the first CIA deployment into Afghanistan after 9/11. I knew Gary a little bit, worked with him a little bit. He's a great human being. He was in the retirement pipeline on 9/11. The director called him in and asked him to lead the first team in, and he said, "Sir, I'd be honored." And he was in Afghanistan 15 days later. And he wrote a book about it. It's called First Stand. I recommend it. And Gary, I know you're in a better place, and God bless you, brother, and thank you for all of your many, many, many contributions to our safety.
And I just want to soften up a little bit. You know, we get critical of the CIA, the Army, all these kind of things. This is exceptionally hard work to do as we started. It's so hard, and it's like, what do you do? How do you do it? And you're constantly chasing your tail to get it right. And it does. There are guys like Gary and all those SF dudes, you know, who went out and got on those horsebacks up in Mazar-i Sharif, and they said, "Hey, we're going to fight this fight with what we got right here, right now." And we can do it better. We should want to do better, but also that work is just it's exceptionally rewarding, frustrating, but also impossible at the same time. And that's one of the things that we can't forget is that, you know, cultural, language, war, all these things, you know, we can all look back in the rearview mirror and know what to do, but when you're out there day to day trying to know in real time, it's tough work. And thank you for doing it also. Anything in closing?
No, I just would thank you again, Pete, for coming back to Houston and for supporting this great cause, Right for the Brave, Save the Brave. You're welcome back anytime. And again, Big C's Pizza House and Brew. I hope anyone in the Houston area or passing through in needing of some good Chicago-style pizza or hot dogs, please come and check it out. Thank you for your time, and God bless America.
Yeah, God bless America indeed. Here we go.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.